Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the pod that looks at the money behind our beautiful game. I'm Kevin Day, and the bedraggled mess sitting across me is Kieran Maguire. So I'm sorry you had such a terrible journey getting here. It's so rainy.
It's a combination of 4 train journeys and storm carer.
Well, it's also because, as I pointed out, you live in the countryside, and if you choose to do that, it should be difficult to get anywhere, basically.
And it certainly is.
Yeah. I was nice and warm as I waited for you to turn up. I got some work done. Guy, our producer, he's nice and warm up there, making the money, sitting on his gold sofa, editing this as it comes up. Now, coming up in the show, does anyone like FA Cup replays? Sky's transfer window nightmare, Wimbledon and Plough Lane, signs of life at Bury, which is brilliant news, and the profits that have come at a cost. So, first of all, replays, FA Cup replays. There's been a lot of fuss, mainly over Jurgen Klopp's attitude to the replay, refusing to turn up at the Shrewsbury-Liverpool game, which it's for a different pod, but I'm actually quite angry about his attitude to the FA Cup, and I suspect that if he hadn't been running away with the Premier League and didn't have such a nice smile, more people would be angry too. How much does it cost to stage a replay?
Well, the cost will be stewarding, it will be the floodlights and so on. So it depends on the size of the crowd. It does very much vary, but the clubs aren't interested in the cost. Ultimately, they're interested in how much money are we going to make from it individually. So Shrewsbury were delighted to have achieved a replay. In the first place, they were 2-0 down to Liverpool and they got back to 2-2. That story has been completely lost and forgotten. And I think that's... I've spoken to some Shrewsbury fans on social media, and I think they feel a little bit upset that they're completely forgotten in all of this. But it's Liverpool that we're talking about, and Liverpool and Manchester United are the 2 clubs that generate the most column inches. What happened in terms of the replay, and the reason why Jurgen Klopp was so upset, was it's in the middle of the winter break. And immediately after the match took place, he said, I'm not going to play my first team. I'm not going to play the other members of the 25 men of my squad. I'm going to play the kids again at Anfield. And therefore, that resulted in Liverpool suggesting that the ticket prices would be reduced. And it was £1 for under-17s to go to the match. That's fantastic if you're under-17. And
as most of the team were, yeah.
That's right. So it meant that there was going to be a 50,000 plus gate at Anfield. Adult ticket prices, I think they were £10 or £15 again, hugely reduced. And I think Shrewsbury had been hoping that the prices would have been perhaps a wee bit more pricey, and they would have made some money out of the replay.
But there's a balancing act there as well, because if the prices were pretty much the same as they were for a league game, you only got a crowd of 25,000, which is what happened. So you could possibly make more money by getting more people in at a discounted price, presumably.
That's right. It is a balancing act. I think we've spoken about the issues in respect of VAR. Shrewsbury had to pay the full price of VAR.
Yes,
but they're getting...
we discussed this in the last pod. Just for those of you who didn't listen to it, can you just elaborate what happened there?
Well, yes. What's happened is that the matches which are hosted by Premier League clubs, VAR is applicable for those matches, and the cost is around about 9,250 quid plus VAT, and that gets split as a cost between both clubs equally. Now, given that Liverpool were forcing the prices lower, I think it would have been a nice gesture for them to say, especially as Shrewsbury had a goal disallowed due to VAR in the replay, to say, look, we are Liverpool. We, as a magnanimous gesture, we'll take the whole of this as a hit.
But they didn't. They passed that cost on to. Could they argue that they're not allowed to do that? Are there rules in place that say they have to do that, or could they have just said, "We'll pass on this one"? Especially as you've probably lost income by us lowering the ticket prices.
A club's perfectly entitled to do, to make a decent gesture. I dropped the VAR issue into social media on Friday night.
I know.
and that created a bit of a storm. And there's been quite a reaction from fans of some of the Premier League clubs, especially Sheffield United fans, who have been fantastic about this. They feel that they were hosting Fylde, who are a non-league club. So £5,000 is a lot of money to a non-league club. It's a huge amount of money. And they say, well, we think that our club should do the right thing.
Oh, good.
So we'll wait and see. Luton fans said, was it worth it that VAR reduced their... it would have been a 5-0 defeat without VAR, but instead they got away with just a 4-0 defeat. So it does... There's swings and roundabouts. On the other side... Tranmere Rovers would not have hosted Manchester United because they got... So VAR isn't necessarily the bad thing. I think that the Premier League clubs have an awful lot of money. Liverpool is a club which is going to have £500 million generated this year. £5,000 for taking the other Shrewsbury share of VAR would have been a fair gesture, especially as they had stolen all of the thunder in terms of the match through Klopp's actions.
Just for clarification, Kieran, VAR is the bad thing. Necessarily or otherwise, VAR is the bad thing. We've ascertained that, and I will brook no argument. Now, the FA Cup, it always used to be the cliche, didn't it? That the one thing that was even better than a giant killing was a giant killing that happened after a replay, because from Shrewsbury's point of view, coming back to get a replay at Anfield was the perfect storm, essentially, because they get the replay and they get the money. If you're a Shrewsbury, if you're a Tranmere, which is the club that you'd most like to? Is it Man United? Is that still the plum replay?
It is. It's Manchester United at Old Trafford. United might cut their prices marginally, but also, as I think you were inferring earlier, had Liverpool been 7th in the Premier League, they wouldn't be put out that side because all of a sudden the FA Cup has some form of importance. Now, for Manchester United, it is important to progress in the FA Cup because they ain't going to win the Premier League and they're not going to win the Champions League. So, therefore, I think United is always a good draw. United get an awful lot of football tourists. Now, this isn't a criticism of the club, but football tourists, they just want to go to Old Trafford to see a game of football, and therefore they're willing to pay full price for it. So, yes, Old Trafford, first of all, it's got the biggest capacity in the country, and secondly, on average, you're going to get the highest prices for, if you are Burton Albion or Exeter or Cambridge United or Crawley. You think about some of the clubs which have gone there in recent years, and potentially they can be looking at making around about £500,000, £750,000 from a match there. I've crunched the numbers. I think Shrewsbury will make perhaps somewhere between 120 and 150 grand. And because Liverpool weren't playing the first team, or even anybody from the first team squad, both BT and the BBC turned round and said, normally we'd want Liverpool because they're good for ratings.
Of course, yes. How interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
So that's cost Shrewsbury another 50 grand.
That's how much they would have got from... That's the standard rate for a televised FA Cup.
Yeah.
At what, no matter what round it is.
I think it marginally progresses, but there's also the main money tends to come from the prize money from progressing from round to round. Liverpool made 180 grand from getting to the 5th round.
Right. So, in terms of replays, it's all very well for the big teams, for the likes of Klopp, to turn around and say we don't want replays, full stop, in any round. We certainly don't want on the 5th, 6th round, but that's potentially denying a lot of lower league clubs a lot of potentially life-saving money, isn't it? And is that one of the reasons why the FA are resistant?
I think so. I think they have scrapped replays from the quarterfinals onwards. Is it the 5th round onwards?
5th round
well?
Onwards, yeah.
Yep.
It's not beyond the realms of impossibility that a Shrewsbury would get to a 5th round tie, so they'd be losing out on potentially a lot of money then, wouldn't
they? They would be, but all 5th round matches are going to be televised in reality, so they would get the TV money. They would have made a reasonable amount of prize money as well. I mean, to be fair to the FA, they have increased the prize money for the FA Cup. So there's got to be a cut-off point. I think the suggestion to take away replays from 3rd and 4th round matches is harsh. We don't need a further expanded Champions League. We don't need a further expanded FIFA World Cup where all the money is. We know that. Liverpool could still put out a weakened team, or Manchester United, and commit themselves to their other matches, and everybody could be a winner from this. And also, ultimately, we're talking about money. You and I, we're football fans.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm a Shrewsbury football fan, how often am I going to get the opportunity to go to one of those grounds? I remember when I used to support Chelmsford City, because I used to live there when I was a kid, and we got drawn against Ipswich, and we thought this was the biggest thing that's going to happen in our lives. And I think to deny fans that, the decisions are being made by money men, fans are being cut and marginalised in the game further and further.
For the benefit of people listening at home, Kieran is now the recipient of the Paddington Stare. After any sentence that starts as "I used to support another team" isn't going to end well, Kieran. What happened? Why do you not support Chelmsford City now, especially for the Labrador Walkers that you support on the South Coast?
Support your local team. At the age of 11, I moved to Brighton. At the age of 9, I used to go to Chelmsford City because there was nowhere else to go. I
would possibly allow you to go to Brighton games because you live in there, but I'm not to see again. This is something else I didn't know about you, Kieran. This is why it took you four pods to even tell me you supported Brighton. It's taken another 12 to tell me you. Oh dear. Anyway, the transfer window, January transfer window. It was a nightmare window for Sky and for Palace. For Palace, it was purely down to incompetence by the people who run our transfer policy. I'm never unhappy seeing Sky discomforted around transfer window time with the resources they throw at basically telling us lies about players in helicopters. We can see them, and they're over the streets of Croydon now. Why was it such a dull transfer? I mean, there was not literally, but there's barely any money spent compared to previous January transfer windows. Was this a one-off? Is it a deliberate policy for clubs not to buy in January now?
I think what we are seeing is the financial fair play has teeth.
Oh, that's interesting, because that's a discussion that probably in the first couple of pods we said. I wouldn't have expected to hear you say that. So.
Well, we've seen now the charges at Sheffield Wednesday and Derby, and potentially Birmingham having the second, Aston Villa potentially having charges in the Premier League as well. So clubs are now aware that the regulatory authorities are taking a much keener investigation of their affairs. And therefore, if you take a look at the Championship, there was only one transfer in the whole of the window for more than £1 million, and that was Nahki Wells going from Burnley to Bristol City. And the only reason why that went through was that Bristol City sold some players in the summer window, and they actually had a lot of cash. All the rest were for loans or for fees of less than £1 million. If you talk to Leeds United fans, they are absolutely aghast at what's happened. I think they picked up one loan signing, and they've had a really bad January on the pitch, and February's not going particularly well either. And there's a lot of frustration that their promotion chances have been damaged because of a reluctance to spend in the window. The reason for that is that Leeds were pretty close to the financial fair play limit. So it's not a case of not wanting to spend, it's more of a case of not being able to spend.
And interesting as well that the one transfer we were linked with was Jared Bowen from Hull in the Championship to West Ham, which nearly went tits up for West Ham because he insisted apparently on a no relegation clause and a hefty sum of money in wages. But West Ham's still keen to pay that. Does that represent good business to you? Because clearly Palace didn't think it did.
Well, it represents good business for Hull City and for Jared Bowen.
Yeah.
If you're in a competitive market and there's a number of people after your services, you go to the highest bidder and you use that as a negotiation tool. So whoever is his agent has simply played the system extremely well and has done the best he can for his client.
We've seen that the summer transfer window is now going to be extended back to where it used to be, in line with European clubs. What does that mean financially?
I think that will benefit most clubs, because what we've had in the last 2 years is that by closing the window at the start of the season, it actually extends the period in which you're taking a gamble. If you think about it, by the end of August, we've probably played 4 fixtures, so therefore there's 7 less in the Championship and there's 4 less in the Premier League. Now, what happens if you've spent £30 million on a signing in July? He turns out to be a complete turkey, or he does his ACL in his debut, and all of a sudden there's no chance of a replacement. So it does give the clubs a chance to rectify the errors that they've made either earlier in the window or that they've lost a player in a key position early on in the season. That player can now be replaced. So I think most managers will probably be relieved. I think the Sky will be happy because it gives them another avenue to explore during August. And from the players' point of view, it extends the period when they can actually find a club, because it's not just Premier League clubs and Championship clubs who are looking. If you are a player who is at a club and the manager said, I ain't going to give you any games this season and you're going to sit out your contract, at least you've got a bit more time. When somebody else has had an injury, you can move on elsewhere.
AFC Wimbledon fans listening to this, I know a lot of them, and I know for them the whole sorry MK Dons franchise saga won't be fully finished until AFC are back in Merton and back at Plough Lane where they believe they belong. It looked like that was going swimmingly, but it seems to be less so now. What's the current stage with that?
Well, I mean, they have been given planning permission, but the costs of building the new stadium, which is, I think, the old Wimbledon dog track, those costs have gone far beyond expectations. So it now looks as if it's going to cost around about £30 million. And I was listening to something from one of their guys from the Supporters Trust, and he said they'd gone to banks and the banks weren't interested in lending. They're £11 million short.
Right.
And they put that down to the three Bs, Bury, Bolton and Brexit, all of which are not good. Banks aren't willing to lend because they don't know what the future markets are going to be like. Banks have also seen what's happened at Bury and Bolton, where in the case of Bury, the club got kicked out, and in the case of Bolton, things are still not great. So what Wimbledon, AFC Wimbledon, have therefore done is that they're selling something called the Wimbledon Bond, which effectively is crowdfunding. They're trying to get £5 million. That's their target, to get £5 million from good-minded souls. And the way that this works is that you can lend the money. So it's going to be a loan from fans to the club. You start off, a minimum buy-in's £1,000, which might put some off. And you can lend that for 5, 10 or 15 years, and you choose the interest rate. So somewhere between 0 and 4%. Now that is strange. As an investment, it can't be recommended. You have to be honest. This is a quasi gift of love from a football fan, from a benevolent individual or two, to people that sympathise with what's happened at AFC Wimbledon and the old Wimbledon Football Club. If they can get £5 million, then they are confident that the banks will give them the other 6, and that will allow them to potentially start playing this August. That's their aim, and it's fingers crossed at present. They've raised £2 million already, so good luck to them.
Well, there are two interesting things for that, Kieran, because it's my area. My Uncle Bill was a Wimbledon fan. I used to go there with him in the old days when Palace were away. Don't worry, when Palace were away. Not an alternative. It wasn't Chelmsford City. But having been to Wimbledon Dog Track before it was closed down, I'm amazed that £30 million is all it will take, because it was fairly dilapidated. And secondly, the banks thing is interesting because I would always associate AFC Wimbledon with being quite an affluent club, with having quite an affluent fan base. So I wouldn't have thought that £5 million would be a difficult sum for them to raise, even in this economic climate.
Well, the fact that they've raised £2 million already
yeah.
I think is a positive, and they've only just launched this scheme. They don't have a big fan base. People in that area, they tend to support other clubs.
Yeah, fair point.
And therefore, who's going to come up with the cash? It's only going to take one person of wealth who could effectively cover the rest of the balance. And I think fans of all other clubs will wish them well.
Well, speaking of which, signs of life at Bury, and we've waited for a long time now. Our very first pod was based around the Bury story, and it seemed like it was done and dusted and finished forever, but apparently not.
Yeah, they're not good signs necessarily.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wish you told me that before. I had such an optimistic tone in my voice. So signs of life at Bury, but they're not good signs. Oh, crikey.
What happened was that on Wednesday, for the 12th time, Bury Football Club Limited was before the High Court on a winding up order for once again non-payment of taxes. Now, most people have thought, well, hold on, there's nobody employed at that club. There is a skeleton existence at Bury Football Club, but Steve Dale, the professional asset stripper, and I can legally call him that because that's what he does, the professional asset stripper in charge of Bury, he still owns the club. There are still people, or there's still somebody employed, and HMRC were after them for non-payment of taxes. Bury Football Club then, of course, at the last minute, paid that amount of money, so there is still something in existence. But what we are seeing with Bury, and this is a classic case of divide and rule by the owner, is that there are two options effectively available for the fans. One of which is half the fans, or a proportion of the fans, they want to put money together to buy the ground, and that will allow them to probably start in perhaps the 7th tier, something like northwest counties of the football pyramid, with a view to getting back via Gig Lane to being another member of the EFL, which they should be.
Yeah.
The alternative to that, there is a club called, I think it's AFC Bury, has been formed, and they're going to start as a park club. This is a pure Phoenix operation.
Yeah, AFC Wimbledon, like Salford, the AFC Man United, etc. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they want to go up through that particular route because they don't want any money to potentially end up in the pockets of Steve Dale.
Yeah.
Steve Dale has played everybody like a piano on this. He plays the legal system by not paying things until the last minute, and he's saying, oh, yeah, I could potentially still sell my involvement in the club, so that means that the fans are falling out. I think 3 executives of one of these two parties, they've resigned because I think there's toxic relationships between the people. It's very difficult, once you're committed to one side or the other, to take on the opposing view. So that's the sadness, is that people who have got a love for the same thing, which ultimately is Bury Football Club, they're now falling out as to how they want the future to evolve.
Well, there's 2 things on this, Kieran. And there's one thing we've learnt from the social media since we started doing this podcast, is that all you have to put is the word Steve Dale on a tweet and you'll get inundated with not just fans of Bury, but fans. He's become to represent everything that's bad about wrong club owners, essentially. So 2 questions. A, first of all, if he'd filed for bankruptcy, would he have avoided paying for that tax burden? And secondly, why is he doing it? Why can't he just walk away and go and asset strip something else? We know that's, you said that's what he does. What's he gaining out of this, unless he's just waiting for somebody, a new consortium to come up and pay for the ground?
Whilst Bury Football Club Limited is in existence, he has control.
Right.
So therefore, that answers your first question. The reason why he didn't just allow the club to be put into liquidation or the winding up orders to succeed would mean that a professional liquidator would take control of the club. And we don't know what he's doing at present, and we don't know who owns what.
I hear you.
So that's the first issue. The second reason is that he's like a Mike Ashley. He's a person with an incredibly thick skin. He's by his own admission, I don't know whether you've ever seen that interview he did with Tony Livesey on 5 Live, where he went into the studio.
I wouldn't have seen it when I'd have heard it, but yeah, it's a detail, Kieran.
But what happened there? He said, I'm not a football fan. I didn't even know Bury Football Club existed.
No.
I bought it for £1, and he's just rubbing people's noses in it. He's some people, as we know, are wind-up merchants, and he loves getting a reaction. So, unfortunately, he's just not a very nice human being, and that's why he does it. Because asset stripping exists. There needs to be somebody at the bottom. Taking old companies and sometimes resurrecting them. I used to do insolvency work, and I know it's sort of the ins and outs of it. And there's chances, and there's some people who are doing it genuinely to try to resurrect employment and things of this nature. Steve Dale, not one of those.
Dear. Right, one last question, and it's one of those that you and Guy have kept from me, the answer, because I think you want a genuine level of reaction. A club that's posted profits for the last 13 years, but apparently it's not a good thing. It's cost them, is that right?
Well, yes, it has cost them. The club involved is Walsall.
Okay.
And
the Saddlers, of course.
The Saddlers, yeah. They made profits last year. They do this every year. But they were relegated from League One to League Two. The only club that has made a profit in the Championship last year from their day-to-day activities, Rotherham United. What happened to Rotherham United?
Yeah.
Relegated.
Yeah.
The previous year, the only club that made a profit, or I think it was 2017, the only club that made a profit in the Championship, Burton Albion. What happened to them? They were relegated. And this is sort of the problem with football, is that it costs so much money to survive that the clubs that do try to run themselves on an honest basis, which surely that's what they all should be aiming to do, they end up getting relegated. If I suspect, the results for the Premier League clubs for last season, they're all losing money. I suspect Huddersfield will have made a profit. Huddersfield got relegated from the Premier League. So it's only sort of some of the elite, and one or two clubs who just take an air shot effectively when they get promoted. And I think it'll be sort of a Norfolk handful of clubs making profits in the Premier League out of 20, which is crazy because we all think it's laced with gold.
I presume a Norfolk handful is 6, is it?
That is correct.
Yeah, I'll disassociate myself with those comments in case Stephen Fry's listening. Walsall fans who are disappointed at relegation, can they console themselves, though, that if the club's being run honestly, like a season or two in the division above will then secure their future for the next 10 seasons, same as Rotherham?
I think they can to an extent, but then I was going through some of the small print in relation to Walsall.
Of course you were.
And you know me in small print. And they don't own the stadium. The stadium is owned by the pension fund of the club owner. And Walsall are paying his pension fund 440 grand a year.
Okay.
Which
is great for the people who have a pension in his fund.
Well, no, it's his personal pension.
It's his own
fund.
personal fund.
It's
not a pension fund he's running.
No. It's money which is.
Is that legal?
Perfectly legal. Yep. And he has walked away. He's a guy called Jeff Bonser. He's been involved with the club for 29 years, and I've got to be honest, he's run the club financially very well.
Right.
I think the new owners who have come in, they're trying to buy the freehold or the leasehold off him. And good luck to them, because if you don't own the property, it does restrict your ability as a club to make money 365 days a year.
Oh, as the new owners of Palace found when Ron Nodes retained the leasehold of the actual cell as well. So essentially, it's a slightly pessimistic note to it. What you're saying basically, you really do need to have to speculate to accumulate. That essentially, the model should be you throw as much money as you can at staying up, because going down financially secure doesn't necessarily work.
Well, if you do go down from the Championship to League One, you go from £7 million a year TV money to £1 million. There's a drop of 300,000 or 400,000 from League One to League Two. So I was talking to an owner of a League One club last week, and he says, that's my fear. Can I afford to drop? Can I afford not to drop? And do you stick or do you twist with where you are at present?
I'm amazed club owners tell you anything. To be perfectly honest, I really am. But what are you described as? Football
finance is fucking Rain Man, which makes you Tom Cruise.
It makes me Tom Cruise. Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with that. Thank you for listening, everybody. The Price of Football is a Dap Dip production. Remember, if you leave us nice reviews where you listen to this pod, it helps our algorithms, according to Guy. Thank you, Kieran. At least you've dried off now.
Yes, thank you very much, Kevin.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.